Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible, right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, your co-host, along with Dr. Don Preston, and it's great to be able to have another discussion from the Word of God. Don, how are you doing today? What's going on in your part of the world? And share with us anything new as far as the news in the preterist movement.
Well, it's been a great week so far, William. I've managed to accomplish an awful lot. Yesterday morning I went to the office, and, as you know, I get there very, very early. But I actually slept in until about 4:20 yesterday morning. I never, ever set an alarm clock. But my internal clock goes off, and I'm normally up about 3:45, something like that. I get up, go to the office, and what have you. And so Jan actually woke me up yesterday morning and told me what time it was, and I almost felt like I was, quote, late for work, unquote, even though I don't operate on a clock per se. But I got busy, and way past time normally when she and I connect for lunch. I didn't even know what time it was. I was so busy, so engrossed in the research, the writing, and the work that I was doing. I literally had no idea what time it was until finally I decided, well, I've just got to go to the post office, and I've got to mail some books and what have you. And, of course, then I remembered then it was Martin Luther King Day, and I couldn't go to the post office, couldn't mail the books. But about that time, I looked at my clock and realized what time it was. Pardon me, I had just simply gotten so engrossed in everything that I completely lost track of time. So that's kind of how things are going. And I have to tell you, William, and I know you're experiencing some absolutely fantastic things over there in Memphis. Wonderful things are going on with you. I got a text message yesterday that is one of those times where you just humbly thank the Lord for the opportunity to be involved in what we're doing. This text message says, I won't give the guy's name obviously, but he said he was from Sherman, Texas, which is only about 70 miles from me, 75, maybe 80. Anyway, he said, I just want you to know I have been watching the YouTubes, and your messages have removed any and all doubt that I had about our Savior. And I just wanted to let you know. And I was like, oh, wow. You can't ask for a better day based on that. I mean, it was just so wonderfully encouraging, so wonderfully thrilling to get that. Just a simple message, not a lot of other comment, but that was sufficient. So that's just incredible.
Well, that's very good. It's always good to have those kind of messages coming in, and especially when you know it's life-changing for people as they listen to the Word of God being taught, and they come to this awareness and appreciation for the Lord Jesus Christ, and hopefully if that leads them to a change in their life and a commitment to serve Him, that's really awesome. And again, as you say, it shows the power of what's going on. We've had, as you were suggesting earlier, we're having, just a great time working in both the radio broadcasts that we're doing, and let me thank, PRI for, continuing support of the broadcast, and it's reaching people not just here in the United States, but because of the outreach on social media with Facebook and possibly Twitter as well, we're reaching people that is, outside of the United States. And we've managed to make contact with a new brother from Nigeria who is the director of a school over there, a public education school, but he also has started 4 churches there. And he's a member of the Church of Christ, by the way. But there are about 600 people that he works with between those 4 churches. And just the other day, he, like another brother over there from Ghana, have declared me their mentor. And I sent them, PDF copies of the tracts that I've done, and I've got to write some more of those because, it just makes it so convenient when you can just pass something out to people, and of course, they read it. And, he read the tracts, and he was very impressed, and he says, look, I need more information. He says, I want you to teach me everything you know about this subject. He says, because we got to get this truth taught here. And so he's looking forward to that, and hopefully we're looking forward, to meeting him sometime. I gotta make a trip to Africa, man. I just gotta get there. So those of you who are out there listening, we need a plane ticket to Africa. I'd love to go to Ghana first because Solomon Bido, who is there, he's trying to get a building up, and of course it doesn't cost him anything to put up a building, and in terms of what it cost us in the United States,
Oh, certainly, yeah.
And so he's got 2 churches there, by the way. One of about 35 members, the other one about 45 or so, and he's constantly baptizing people. And so we're, we want to influence him. I met him through Steve Bazin, but he's working, and he wrote an article he wrote a preterist article the other day, from the preterist point of view, and did just a fantastic job. It was a tract, I think, that he was writing, and he says he's going to write some more. But he's got a very good grasp of the view. And he's been in it a little bit longer than this new brother, but and is doing a great job. So he articulates it very well. He writes me pretty much every day, and I don't know if you've contacted him and talked with him before, but he's pretty sharp, and he's asking about the deeper things in the Word of God at this point, in terms of what he's studying. But it's very exciting to see that. We've also got contacts in the Ivory Coast and Kenya. And, I've been studying with this lady, she listens to the broadcast a lot, but at first, her background was Seventh-day Adventist. And so for a long time, she remained that way. And then finally, she said, I get it, I see it. And so now she's saying, she's almost fed up with trying to go to some of the churches around there because of, the stuff that they're teaching. And so it's very, very good to hear those kind of things going on. And then, I'm just kind of sharing some of the exciting stuff that's happening here. We've got a brother who has been in the Hebrew Israelite movement for about 7 years, and his name is Elvin Israel. If you listen to the radio broadcast that we do on KWAM here in Memphis, he was on the show with me last week. He comes up now. He tries to get here on a weekly basis, and he's got 6 girls. So they got a pretty good-sized family, and so he brought them all up, and they all spent the night with me this past Saturday, and we all went out to dinner on Sunday. But he comes up so we can go out and do door knocking and do other studies. This week we had a meeting scheduled with another Hebrew Israelite that had actually heard the debate between me and Captain Tazariak, who is out of the One West camp of IESUPK in Harlem. And that debate was heard by about 60 to 70,000 people. It might be growing there. But Elvin heard that debate, and he had decided he was going to refute what I was saying. So he started out that way. And he said he listened to it 5 times. And after 5 times, he was convinced that I was teaching the truth. And and now, Don, this young man is he's incredible. He gets on Facebook every day and teaches the preterist view. He has influenced several people, and we're in a class with them now, and the class is growing every single week. We do a class on Monday night, and it's growing every single week with attendees from the Hebrew Israelite movement. And we've got one gentleman who is also from Nigeria. We talked to him, and he has expressed a desire to come to Memphis. He wants to be baptized. He's coming to Memphis. And then he also has considered actually moving here because he wants the support of a congregation and to be around guys who are teaching so he can be influenced from that perspective. He said, there's nothing holding him down. And so we're just excited about that. They're going to be, Elvin and his family are going to be joining our congregation very soon. And so we're again, excited about that. And this guy comes in, he's got a lot of background in the Hebrew Israelite movement, in the arguments and methodologies that they take on Scripture. So that's a great plus. And I'm learning quite a few things from him as well. His background is, he's a truck driver, but he is also a licensed teacher. So he's very skilled in research and in presenting information from that point of view. And so it will be a great addition to have him as a person coming in already capable of articulating the view, of debating the view, and teaching as well. And so that will make a great addition to the teaching team we have already between Brother Larry Connor, who does it by remote. He's from Louisiana. And and you met him at the seminar. He's a great guy, right. Just an all-around fantastic guy.
I was very impressed, very impressed.
Yes. And so now Elvin with the team. And, of course, we'll have more because, like I said, they're coming in, not only just men, but we're also, encouraging some ladies who are coming. And they are sharing information on Facebook, even though they're not necessarily, identified with us at this point. But the information they're learning, they're beginning to share it. And so there's a lot that is picking up. And one last thing I'll say, just as far as these announcements are concerned, we have a debate coming up. We did a study, Elvin, when he came up this week. As I told you, we were studying with this other gentleman who was a Hebrew Israelite. He actually saw that same debate. So he wanted to study. I met him at a building supply store, and he approached me and said, hey, I know you, et cetera, and you debated, Captain Tazariak was the guy's name. And he said, that was a very good debate. He says, I learned a lot. He says, but I'd like to study with you. So we went over and got there about 5 that evening. We didn't leave till 12 o'clock that night in the study with him. And because I had some issues to take care of with some houses, I didn't get home until we got home at 2 o'clock that morning. Elvin, went right on to sleep. And, of course, I stayed up until about 5. I think I went to bed at 6 o'clock and had to get back up, in an hour and a half to go to the radio station. So, I mean, it was a full day, but it was a great study. So they asked us if we wanted to take it further. And, of course, we agreed that we would have a debate. So it's going to come up on the 9th of February, which is not much time. They wanted to do it like right away. And so, of course, we said, okay, we would do it. So we're going to have a public debate with them in the very near future. And so that's kind of what's going on. And a lot of things picking up, but we expect they'll continue to do so as we continue to work. So, again, I'm going to make that appeal. Well, hey, I want to go to Africa, and we need a plane ticket. I'll take care of my food and everything else if I can just get a plane ticket to Africa. And, because I want to meet some of these guys and see what it will take to work with them and help them as much as possible and to build some ties there. And I know we've been working with people in Ethiopia and India, and we're looking forward to going to India this year. But that's kind of what's on the table with us at this point.
Well, the only question I have is, what are you going to do in your spare time?
Have I ever had any? You know, the good thing is
Well,
Leora's birthday is coming up on the 2nd, and so you know, we were going to originally have the debate in 2 weeks, and then I realized that, you know, I'd already promised her we were going to, you know, go out of town and have a, you know, just a little excursion for the two of us, and then I had scheduled a debate on top of that, so I had to call the guy back. And fortunately, he called back as well and wanted to make some changes. So we were both agreeable to that. And so now I get a chance to go out and relax, you know, in a week
there
or
you go.
two. And so that's going to be good. And then, you know, we'll have a little time to get prepared for the discussion. But other than that, there is no time, you know.
No.
But I'm excited. You know, it's
Well,
so
I
much
don't
fun
blame you.
to have somebody, you know, local here doing this with you, and especially, you know, a guy like Elvin who is just, I mean, on fire with this. I mean, and he's good. He's a good communicator, very personable, compassionate person, and that's a plus and a win-win all the way around.
Well, it's just so exciting to hear about things like that, and yeah, I don't blame you for wanting to go to Africa. That's a super thrilling prospect. It's such tremendous potential. I mean, things like this, we keep telling people all of the time of how things are progressing throughout the world. And then, then, as we pointed out, we have the detractors of covenant eschatology. Well, you know, these predators, they're a tiny little bitty handful of people. Well, why do you spend your time trying to refute us then? If there's so few of us, and if we're not growing, why in the world do you spend your time? Why do you waste your time, especially on Facebook, with some of them who are on Facebook virtually 24 hours a day, or so it seems, doing nothing but writing against covenant eschatology, and in some cases against me personally. And so it just demonstrates, though, they know that covenant eschatology is growing by leaps and bounds. And when we hear about these situations in India, in Africa, in South America, Ethiopia, and in other regions, and like I said, this text message I got this week from 80 miles away from me, that type of thing is just so tremendously encouraging, and it lets us know that progress is in the air. Changes are taking place. We hear from people over and over and over again who are saying, what can I do to spread this message? And I tell you, it's just absolutely fantastic. By the way, William, to shift gears just a little bit here, on the intro to the program, you say Don Preston is the author of 19 books. Well, the other day...
Look, do I need to change that to 38? No?
You know what's coming here. You know, I got this email the other day from this fellow who says, I want to order every one of your books. Well, actually, he called me first, and we're talking, and he goes, how many books have you written? And honest to goodness, folks, this is the truth. I didn't even know. Okay, I'm not focused on the number of books at all. I'm focused on the research and on the writing. I write a book, and I move on. And he said, so how many books have you written? And I said, honestly, I have no idea. I said, I think it's 24 or 25. And he goes, well, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I want to order each one of your books. I said, okay, that's great. Tell you what I'll do. When I get home, I'll have my wife, run an invoice. And so my wife came in and handed me an invoice, and it listed 30 books. And I said, have I written 30 books? Yes. And she goes, well, count them for yourself. And I said, well, I guess that actually has to be amended to 31 because I published a Kindle book, strictly Kindle, just last week, entitled The Gospel of Destruction, which is selling pretty well, as a matter of fact. It was kind of an experiment. I've never done just strictly a Kindle book before. And so I produced it, put it on Kindle, and it's generated some good interest. But now I'm in the process of getting ready to publish this book on the death of Adam and the life of Christ. So you're going to have to make this intro to where you can edit that about every other week, William.
Well, you know what? I think I'm going to prophesy with the next one, so I'm just going to say 100 books, and then you just have to fulfill it.
Okay, I'll work on that. I've in addition to the one that we're getting ready to do, and you know, all I'm waiting on is a foreword right now. But anyway, as soon as that was published, I've got 2 or 3 others in the quay, and but I have promised myself, and I promised a lot of people, by the way, that I was going to focus on my book on the Sabbath. So I'm really, really going to get focused on that book on the Sabbath as soon as the one on the death of Adam and the life of Christ is finished. But anyway, yeah, I couldn't help but laugh as I listened to the intro tonight, where it said he's authored 19 books. I go, whoops.
Yeah, that's been a few years ago, so it's about time. We'll do a new one and upgrade.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to share, and it's great to hear of the progress that is being made with covenant eschatology, preterism throughout the world, of how, as you mentioned at the very first, it truly is changing lives. It's restoring people's faith in the Lord, His Word. You know, in spite of all the distractions that are out there, in spite of all of these voices, if you want to call them that, on Facebook, for instance, of people who claim that they were preterists at one time, and now they've abandoned it. And they get on there day after day after day after day, posting what they claim are irrefutable arguments. And yet, folks who are preterists, and let me tell you, there's some really sharp preterists out there.
Oh, there really are.
I'm telling you, there are some guys out there, and I sit and I read those posts, and I'm going, I don't need to answer anything. These folks have blown that completely out of the water. And so it's that is impressive. And it's thrilling when you see all of these different voices that are out there defending the truth and just blowing holes in the objections by our adversaries. And you feel so encouraged, because as you can well remember, William, there were times in which there were extremely few voices like ours out there, and now they're literally everywhere. They are literally everywhere.
I see new videos popping up on Facebook from people that I don't know, all the time. I mean, not Facebook. Well, some on Facebook as well, but on YouTube as well. So the number is definitely growing.
I am amazed at the new faces, the new voices, the new names that just pop up seemingly on a daily basis. And you watch some of those and you're going, whoa, that was good. Now,
yes.
Some of them are admittedly not the greatest communicators in the world, but they're adding their voice to the choir,
That's right.
as it were.
And they have an influence and a reach that we don't have, and
exactly
so
right.
it makes a difference.
That's exactly what I started to say. Every new voice has an audience that you and I cannot reach, that might not listen to us, and so every voice that is added, what's that old saying, kicks the can down the road just a little bit more.
I'm too young to know.
Listen at that. Okay, I'm going to log off now and let you do this show, young man. Well, whatever. But, it does. It just adds again, every new voice adds to the reach of covenant eschatology. And it's just absolutely fantastic. So, we normally take some time here at the beginning of each one of our programs to share with our listeners what's going on. And they appreciate that. I hear from them. It's so cool to hear about what's going on. Many of them, say such things that it's just great to hear of what's going on in the world, how it's spreading, how it's growing, etc. And so that's one of the reasons that William and I take this time in order to share with you, in order to let you know that, you know what, you might be the only person in your immediate area. That does not mean that you are alone. There is a preterist community that is growing. It's growing rapidly. And there are other folks. William, Jan and I recently had the privilege of attending a preterist fellowship in Oklahoma City. And we were astounded. We didn't know what to expect. The leader of that, the organizer of the get-together, he was a man that I knew his name, and he sent us an invitation because some good friends of ours, Dale and Marlena Robbins, whom you know, had told him, reach out to Don, get him up here, invite him. He may not be able to come because he's so busy, but at least send him an email and let him know. And so he did, told us where it was going to be, and since it was going to be held at a barbecue restaurant, well, hey, how could I turn that down, right? So it happened to be a weekend that we did have open, and so Jan and I went up there, and there were 30 people there.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, spread out all over Oklahoma City and surrounding communities. And I have sent him since then, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's this weekend. They've got another get-together plan. And so I sent him the names of two couples from Oklahoma City that are preterists, that are close friends of ours. And so they're going to try to get them to attend as well. But they seem to continue to grow. And that's really, really encouraging. And these are people from every imaginable denominational background. And so naturally they're going to go through some growing pains, through some adjustment pains, but that's okay. They have a mutual love for one another, a mutual love for the truth, and they're going to try to work through those issues. And so, that was just super, super exciting. And what was really, really exciting to me, William, when he introduced me, he just asked, how many of you here know of Don Preston? Well, out of a group of 30, there were probably 10 people who had never heard my name before. They had almost come to the view of preterism on their own, through their own studies. And I asked them,
wow,
how did you come to these views? Well, I was just reading the Bible. And I figured out real soon that something had to have happened in that century, or else the Bible is not true. And I told him right then and there, I said, look, I'm always thrilled, I'm always honored, I'm always flattered when people say, and like I said, about 20 out of the 30 watch our YouTube videos almost every, and that's wonderful. We truly appreciate that. But I told him, I said, I have to tell you, when I see such a large number of people who came to these views on their own, strictly and solely through studying the Bible on their own, and William, these people didn't even know each other. So here were about 10 different people who had come to understand covenant eschatology strictly and solely on their own, independent of anyone else. And I told them, I said, you are the kind of folks that get me ultra, ultra excited. Obviously, to reiterate, I'm thrilled when people say, boy, you've been a blessing in my life, Don. I've read your books. I love your videos. But when I hear from you, the people who studied on your own, came to your own conclusions, independent of anyone, that is awesome to me. And so, I mean, it was a great time. It really, really was a great time up there.
Well, that's great. It's always good to hear that. And I can identify with them, because that's how I ended up a preterist, just reading the Bible, and there it popped out at me. So
yeah. Well, I didn't have help, as it were. It was through my own independent study that forced me to re-examine my traditional views. And that's when I started encountering, the difficulties in sharing my views with my brethren, because they absolutely did not want to hear what I was sharing. Just didn't want to hear it, and warned me about it, threatened me, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, guys, what's the problem here? All I'm doing is studying the Bible. Well, you just can't do that. No, you just can't do what you're doing here. So anyway, that's just a tiny bit of what's going on, and it's just so thrilling to know those kind of things, and to meet all these new people that I'd never met before. Brand spanking new people to get to know and to share the message. And they were kind enough to ask me to make a few comments, and I did. And believe it or not, I didn't speak for 30 minutes. I just gave a few comments and about. They wanted to know about my personal journey mostly. That was the question that they asked from the floor. How I, coming from the Church of Christ background, had wound up, believing what I do, and so that's kind of what I shared with them. But it was just an absolutely great time. It really was.
Well, that's exciting. That's very good, and hopefully, we'll hear a lot more from that group in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, boy, I hope so. Well, okay. Well, we've talked for half of our hour here, William, sharing these wonderful, exciting news bits about what's happening in our world with our audience. So let's get back to Isaiah chapter 4. We've been going through Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. Pardon me. In our study of the Messianic Temple, demonstrating that Isaiah chapter 2 and following shall come to pass in the last days, that the mountains of the Lord's house shall be established in the tops of the mountains and exalted above the hills. That is, by virtually unanimous consensus, a prediction of the Messianic Temple. And what we've done on our program thus far is we have shown that the context here, the framework, is the last days. We've demonstrated from chapter 3, and by following all of these references to in that day, that this last days framework is the time of judgment on Israel. It's not about the end of time. It's not about the judgment of the church. It is about the last days of Israel, a time of famine, a time of warfare, a time when the men of Israel would fall by the edge of the sword. Chapter 3, verse 25, which, as I've pointed out, Jesus echoes in Luke 21, verse 24 and 25. So we've come into chapter 4, and we've shown that the same connective phrase, in that day, appears tying this discussion with the previous chapter. So in that day of chapter 4 is still the time when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. Well, Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword, and in that day 7 women would take hold of one man and say, we're going to eat our own bread, we're going to wear our own apparel, but let us be called by your name, take away our reproach. Well, why would 7 women take hold of one man and say, let us call ourselves by your name? It is because their husbands had died in the in the war, in the conflict, in the battle. But then verse 2, in that day, which is, once again, when the men of Israel would fall by the edge of the sword, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious. The fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for those who are escaped. We talked last week that this is the salvation of the remnant. And you gave us a real great little brief summary of how important the doctrine of the remnant is, not only in the Old Testament, but in the New. Well, let's go down to verse 3 now. It shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and he that remains in Jerusalem shall be called holy, even every one that is written among the living in Jerusalem. You know, William, this verse has an awful lot in it that can be unpacked. Number one, it's a continuation of the remnant doctrine. Number two, it identifies the remnant as those who are holy. And that only makes sense because the remnant are the, quote, survivors. They are the ones blessed by the Lord. They are the ones written in the book of life. That's essentially what it says. They shall be written among the living in Jerusalem. And that those who are written is generally a reference to God's book of life. Now, it's important for us to understand that in Jewish and Hebraic thought, during the feast of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the Jews believed that God's books were opened. They had the book of life, the book of condemnation, if you please, the book of the dead, and another book. And the book of life was for those who were saved, those whose good deeds had placed them in God's favor. The book of death, as we might call it, is for those whose wickedness had placed them outside of God's favor. But the other book was a book that was undetermined. That's not the name of it. But this book contained the name of those who had not yet been judged as either for life or for death, condemnation. And it was that book, or it was that time during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that the books were opened. And Edersheim says, along with several other scholars and ancient sources, Edersheim says that the Jews believed that during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, not only was Israel judged, but the entire world was judged. The ancient Jews did not believe that what happened to them, happened to them only. They believed that Israel was the very center of the world and representative of the world, to such an extent that whatever happened to Israel was indicative of what happened to the world. If Israel was going to be blessed, it meant that the world was going to be blessed. If Israel was condemned, that almost assuredly meant that the world was going to be condemned. Israel was the standard by which the world was judged, according to Hebraic thought. And so, again, it's very, very important that we understand this concept of those who are written among the living, what that refers to. This is the time of judgment. This reference to written among the living is one of those very, very subtle, but nonetheless powerful allusions to the feast days of Israel that would have been understood by any Jew as referring to, well, all of this context here is a context of judgment. It's the time of war against Israel. This is Rosh Hashanah. This is judgment. Now, judgment could be for life. It could be for death. That depended upon the person standing before God. And so those who are left are written among the living because they are the righteous. But again, the thing that I wanted to point out was that, again, as is true of so many passages in the Old Testament as well as the New, we have these very subtle references to Israel's feast days. Now, why do I mention that? It is because we're in the context of the Messianic Temple. So the Messianic Temple was going to be constructed in the last days, and it would be in that day that, guess what? Those who, the remnant, would be written among the living. So at judgment, in the last days, the remnant would be considered the righteous at the day of judgment, at the climax of Israel's festal calendar. That's what this is about. And so, I just keep finding this kind of allusion and reference. It's kind of like Hosea chapter 10. I just found this the other day. Hosea 10, I believe it's verse 12. I'll have to look that up to confirm. But in Hosea chapter 10, the Lord said, I am the Lord your God. Now, mind you, this is in the context of the impending judgment of Israel at the hand of the Assyrians, sort of kind of like the historical context of Isaiah. So, although Isaiah is clearly about the last days, but in Hosea chapter 10, the Lord said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I will yet cause you to dwell in tabernacles according to the days of the feast. And you're going, holy cow! That's the Feast of Tabernacles. And what the Lord is saying here, this is your time of judgment. This is your time of destruction. This is your death. Because back in chapter 5 and 6, the Lord said he was going to slay Israel by the word of the prophets and by the word of his mouth. He wasn't killing them literally, physically and bodily. No, when Israel sinned before Yahweh, she died. And yet she sinned more and more. So here is Israel that sinned, and in sinning she died, but the Lord said, guess what? The time is coming in which I will cause you to dwell in booths, in the tabernacles, according to the days of the feast. Well, what did Sukkot, what did the Feast of Sukkot symbolize? What did it foreshadow? Resurrection. So, we have both Isaiah predicting the time of Israel's, the salvation of the remnant being written in the book of the living. We have Hosea, Yahweh in Hosea, speaking of the time in which, although Israel was being slain, destroyed, the Lord said, I will cause you to dwell in tabernacles as in the days, or according to the feast, the days of the feast. I'm going to raise you from the dead in fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles. And of course, Hosea 13:14 is a prediction of the resurrection, because Paul quotes it in 1 Corinthians 15:56 and said his doctrine of the resurrection would be in fulfillment of Hosea 13:14. So this is incredible to see in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 3, this subtle reference to the feast days being fulfilled in the last days in the judgment of Israel, when the majority would perish, but the remnant would be written in the book of life. I just, when I began to see all of these connections, as I've shared with you so many times, William, the more you study these scriptures and the more you see these festal references, the more it forces us to understand what those feast days represented and foreshadowed, and therefore to be able to tap into, okay, what in the world might this reference in Isaiah chapter 4, verse 3, what might it mean when it talks about the remnant being written among the living? Well, we could know if we understand Israel's feast days. If we don't know, we will completely and totally, William, I have to tell you, the traditional view in which you and I were raised, well, the books being opened are at the end of time. That's Revelation chapter 20, 10 through 12. I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were open. And another book was open, and that is the book of life. And that's the end of time. And so we rip those festal references completely out of their historical and soteriological context and apply them to the end of an age that has no end. We apply them to an age to which they do not apply, and it's just incredibly sad that we completely overlook the actual context of these references. Being found in the book of the living, again, has nothing to do with the end of time. Has nothing to do whatsoever with the traditional views of eschatology. It has everything to do with the fulfillment of Israel's feast calendar. Did all that make any sense, William?
It makes a lot of sense. I was just sitting here almost making out a chart while you were talking that I'm going to use in the debate. I'd already started on some points, and you just gave me a few more to throw in there. But yes, absolutely. If you're going to talk about the books being open and that is an alleged end-of-time judgment, they cannot deny that it's a reference to the book of Revelation and, chapter 20. And yet these things are happening in that day. But once you connect it to the temple or the tabernacle, you've got some serious problems there. And that's what, of course, as you wrote the book on Thessalonians and tied in, from a long time, you've been talking about this in terms of the correlations between Isaiah chapter 2 through 4 and 2 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Thessalonians. So there you are right there with the temple typology and references right there in the book. So it's just a powerful one and makes I think a very, very exciting debate premise, and proposition, which I will be using when when the time comes. But yeah, it's a great correlation.
Well, I just, as I said, the more I study the feast days, the more I see these subtle allusions, which, yes, to reiterate, that any Jew conversant with the language of the feast days would instantly recognize. There would be no question whatsoever in their mind about what this was referring to. And yet, because we today are so far removed from the vernacular of the feast days, because we today are so far removed from any practice and understanding of the feast days, because we are so far removed from the typology of the feast days, we read right over, we gloss right over these references, or, again, we extrapolate them to the end of time. I mean, after all, we've been told, hey, the last days are the Christian age. Well, let's see what happens here. If we can understand that Isaiah chapter 4, verse 3 is a reference to Israel's feast days and the fulfillment of Israel's feast days, then that means that Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, as we've spoken of before, is talking about Israel's fate in the Christian age. Now, wait a minute. Folks, one of the most fundamental doctrines of amillennialism, and to a certain extent postmillennialism as well, is that God was through with Israel at the cross, and that the last days refers to the Christian age. Kenneth Gentry, for instance, as a postmillennialist, believes that the term the last days refers to the Christian age. Now, that puts him at odds with men such as Joel McDermott, Gary DeMar, and others. But in the amillennial world of the churches of Christ, for instance, it's just taken for granted that the last days is the Christian age. Well, okay. Then that means that here is Isaiah predicting that in the Christian age, Israel was going to be judged. Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. Why in the world is God predicting the fate of Israel during war in the Christian age if he was through with them at the cross? I mean, after all, if he's through with them, he's through with them, right? That's just what we've been told. But why is God saying that Israel's feast days, the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the opening of the books, and the salvation of those written in the books, why is God saying that was going to take place? The fulfillment of Israel's feast days in the Christian age. Wait a minute, folks. In the churches of Christ, in the amillennial world as a whole, and in the postmillennial world, and by the way, even in the dispensational world, it is claimed that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. It passed away. Thomas Ice says the law of Moses was completely fulfilled and done away with in the first century. Well, wait a minute. Here is Isaiah chapter 4, verse 3, talking about the fulfillment of the law of Moses, i.e. the feast days. Talking about the fulfillment of the law of Moses. How can you argue that the law of Moses was done away with and yet understand that Israel's feast days and the opening of the books at those feast days was yet to be fulfilled in the last days? Every event of Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 belongs in the last days. But every event in Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 has to do with Israel and her judgment, her destruction, the salvation of her remnant. Now, make no mistake, the close of Israel's covenant history would be the time of the full bloom of the new covenant and a new people, which would be the salvation of the remnant, which we've already talked about, coming together with the Gentiles to create one new man of both Jew and Gentile, not Jew and Jew, not Jew and Israel, but of Israel and the Gentiles, the pagans, the nations, to create one new man. Not a man of blood, not a man of the flesh, but a new creation based upon faith in Jesus Christ. Only those who are of faith are the seed of Abraham. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 6. And so once we begin to tap into this concept that Israel's feast days, as I stated a few moments ago, Israel believed that what happened to Israel during her feast days happened to the world because Israel was a representative of the world. God judged the world through Israel. If we understand that and we see the festal references, then number one, it absolutely destroys the idea that the last days are the Christian age. It destroys the idea that God was through with Israel at the cross. It destroys the idea that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross, because this is about the fulfillment of Israel's feast days. Now, if Isaiah 4 verse 3 is about the fulfillment of Israel's feast days, then Israel's feast days were not eliminated, nailed to the cross. God was not through with Israel at the cross. And oh, by the way, God was not through with Israel on Pentecost. This is all such incredibly wonderful and incredibly powerful evidence. And again, it demands, since our topic is the Messianic Temple. It forces us to put all of this, the promise of the Messianic Temple, the judgment on Israel, the salvation of the remnant, all within Israel's last days generation. And by the way, let's return to that imagery of the remnant very, very quickly. We touched on it last week, but it's really, really, really important that we understand. Paul in Romans chapter 9 through 11 discusses the salvation of the remnant. And he says, has God cast away his people whom he foreknew? Well, heaven forbid. I am an Israelite, born, of the tribe of Benjamin. And so Paul lets us know that the salvation of the remnant, the doctrine of the remnant, is an absolutely critical doctrine so far as he is concerned. And then notice what he says. As he discusses the salvation of the remnant, he says in chapter 9 and verse 28, after quoting from Isaiah chapter 10, verse 20, and the promise of the salvation of the remnant, if the Lord had not left us a remnant, we would be like Sodom. We would be like Gomorrah. And the Lord promised, a short work will the Lord make on the earth. So what does Paul tell us about the salvation of the remnant, that process of the salvation of the remnant that was going on in his day? He said, well, the Lord's not going to extend it. It's not going to be a long, drawn-out process of bringing Israel's covenant history to its close and opening up the vistas of covenant reality to all nations, any nation, all nation, any man and all men. The Lord will make a short work upon the earth. God was going to complete the salvation of the remnant in the last days of Isaiah, chapters 2 through 4. The salvation of the remnant is not an ongoing 2,000-year process. It is a process that was begun in the first century and came to a climactic close because, notice, the salvation of the remnant in Isaiah chapter 2 would take place at the judgment. When would it take place? In the day when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. Let's not forget what Jesus applied that to. Jesus directly echoed Isaiah 3:25 in Luke 21:24 and 25. Now, if Jesus is directly echoing and applying Isaiah 3:25 to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, by the way, here's what's interesting. Even the dispensationalists admit that Luke 21:20 to 24 and 25, many of them include 25, if it's admitted that Luke 21:20 through 24 referred to AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem at that time, then since Jesus is quoting, citing, alluding, echoing Isaiah 3:25 and applying it to AD 70, then guess what that demands? It demands that the remnant was saved by AD 70. That means that the salvation of all Israel of Romans 11:25 to 27, which is the completion of the salvation of the remnant. Paul doesn't change from a doctrine of the salvation of the remnant, Romans 9:28, to a doctrine of the salvation of comprehensive all Israel. No, he is talking about the completion of the salvation of the remnant in Romans 11:25 to 27. And so all of this, remember, all of this has to do with the doctrine of the Messianic Temple. Oh, and by the way, the Messianic banquet is included in that as well. So once we understand, if we can begin to truly grasp Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, the framework, the context, then it is absolutely inescapable that the Messianic Temple was established in the last days of Israel that came to their end, the fall of Jerusalem, in AD 70, when the men of Israel fell by the edge of the sword. Well, folks, we're out of time for this evening. I want to thank you so very, very much for joining William and me here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust, and two guys and a Bible. William, great to be with you. Great to hear of your exciting news over there. Keep up the fantastic work, my friend. And, folks, good night, and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.